Disclaimer. Although this video is purely for educational purposes, some of the information in this video might be false, and graphic images might be wrong. It is your duty to verify any information you get from here. Title: History of the United Kingdom. Prehistoric Britain, up to 43 AD. Before Britain had a name, before kings, before crowns, this land pulsed with silence. Wind swept across rolling hills. Dense forests whispered to no one. But it wasn't empty. Beneath the canopy, humans moved, quiet, resilient. Watching the seasons shift, the herds migrate, the stars turn. Nearly 1 million years ago, the first of them left footprints in the sand. Not myths, not guesses. Real prints, preserved by time and tide on the coast of Norfolk. Small families hunting, gathering, living between ice ages, forced to vanish as the cold returned, and then reappear when the land softened again. They were people of stone and fire. They shaped blades from flint, lit their camps with sparks from rock. They tracked mammoths and wild horses. No buildings, no writing, but memory. That they had, passed from voice to voice, a story bound not by paper but by survival. As the glaciers retreated for good, Britain became an island. The North Sea swallowed the land bridge. But by then, settlers had arrived. Farmers, builders. They carved land from forest, raised sheep, planted barley, and they began to leave their mark. Earthworks, barrows, circles of stone. One monument still defies time and logic: Stonehenge. A ring of massive stones, hauled from the distant Welsh hills, arranged with stunning precision. Aligned with the solstice sun. Who built it? Why? Nobody can say with certainty, but it wasn't random. It was ritual, sacred, repeated, generation after generation. As the centuries turned, new waves came. Around 2500 BC, the Beaker people arrived. They brought not just pottery, but bronze. And with bronze, everything changed. Tools became sharper. Farming became faster. Warfare became deadlier. Power shifted to those who controlled metal. Graves grew more elaborate. Burial goods hinted at status. Gold necklaces, imported beads, even amber from the Baltic. This was a land connected, not isolated. Across the channel, trade routes thrived. Ideas moved with goods. And so did ambition. By 800 BC, iron had replaced bronze, a harder metal for a harder time. Hill forts rose across the land, defensive settlements ringed with timber and stone. Inside, tribal leaders ruled. Warriors trained, families gathered around fire and story. The people who lived here are often called Celts, but they weren't one people. They were dozens of tribes, each with their own lands, customs, dialects. The Iceni in the east, the Catuvellauni in the south, the Brigantes in the north. They were connected by shared beliefs, seasonal festivals, reverence for nature, and the Druids. Druids weren't just priests, they were lawmakers, judges, philosophers. They held no weapons, but they held power. They memorized complex legal codes, trained for decades in secret groves, guided their people through ritual and consequence. They were feared and respected. To these tribes, the world was alive. Trees had spirits, rivers held memories. The sun and moon weren't distant objects, they were beings, always watching. Life was tied to the land, and death was just another phase of it. But even in this spiritual world, politics thrived. Some tribes allied, others warred. Battles were fought over territory, cattle, honor. Chariots clashed on open fields. Kings ruled by strength, charisma, and divine favor. Power could shift in a single moon. And across the sea, another power watched. Rome had heard the stories. of fierce warriors. Painted skin, chariots flying down hills, trade with Gaul brought British tin, wool, and slaves into Roman markets. But for all their fascination, the Romans had not yet conquered. That changed when Julius Caesar crossed the Channel in 55 BC. He came with legions, but not for conquest. His arrival was part reconnaissance, part intimidation. He fought battles, took hostages, claimed victory, but he left just as quickly. Yet his words stayed behind. He called it Britannia. He noted its wealth, its warriors, its potential. And in the minds of Roman generals and emperors, the island became more than a curiosity. It became a target. For now, life in Britain continued as it had for centuries. Tribes ruled, druids guided, the land fed its people, but the winds were changing. And in time, boots would thunder across the southern coast. Eagles would rise, and Britain's story would turn from mystery to invasion. So ends the age of spirits and stone. What comes next is the march of empire. Roman Britain AD 43 to 410. They came by sea, disciplined, armed, and determined. In AD 43, under the orders of Emperor Claudius, the Roman invasion of Britain began. Not as a raid, not as a warning, but as a conquest, a permanent claim. Led by General Aulus Plautius, they landed on the southeastern coast, clashing almost immediately with British tribal warriors. The resistance was fierce. Tribes such as the Catu-Velauni, led by the warrior king Caratacus, pushed back hard. Skirmishes erupted across rivers and valleys, but Roman discipline proved brutal. The British fought with courage, chariots thundering across open fields, but the Romans fought with formation, tactics, and siege engines. After key victories, Claudius himself arrived to stamp imperial authority. He brought war elephants, giant beasts unknown to Britain, as a spectacle of might. Camulodunum was taken. It became the first Roman colony in Britain. From there, Rome began to spread like wildfire. But conquest wasn't the end, it was only the beginning. Roads carved through the countryside, straight and unwavering. Military forts evolved into towns. A city called Londinium began to rise on the banks of the Thames, a trade hub, a capital in waiting. Aqueducts carried water. Amphitheaters echoed with cheers and screams. Roman baths steamed. Latin echoed in market stalls and courts. Some tribes submitted and were rewarded with Roman citizenship, land, and peace. Others rebelled and were crushed, none more famously than the Iceni under their queen, Boudica. Her husband, a Roman client king, died, leaving his lands to his daughters and to Rome. Rome, however, refused. They seized everything, flogged the queen, violated her daughters. Humiliation ignited fury. Boudica rose, and with her, an army of vengeance. In a violent blaze, Camulodunum fell. Londinium was abandoned to fire. Roman citizens were slaughtered. The revolt spread like a fever. But Rome doesn't forgive or forget. The governor, Suetonius Paulinus, regrouped. On an unknown battlefield, he met Boudica's forces. Despite being outnumbered, Roman precision decimated the rebels. Tens of thousands died. Boudica, facing defeat, ended her life. The revolt ended, but it left a scar. Rome tightened its grip. Forts expanded, garrisons reinforced. Romanization deepened. To the north, Rome saw threats beyond the tribal lines, beyond the firths and forests. Governor Agricola launched campaigns deep into Caledonia, now Scotland. There, in AD 83, the Battle of Mons Graupius took place, Rome's furthest military reach in Britain. Victory was claimed, but control was fleeting. Resistance remained too wild, too fierce. And so came Hadrian's Wall. Stretching 73 miles coast to coast, it marked the northern edge of empire, not just a barrier, but a message. Beyond this line, Rome does not rule. It was manned by soldiers, built with stone, segmented by gates and mile castles. Watchtowers gazed out over the hills where painted warriors still roamed. Behind the wall, Britannia prospered, at least for some. Villas dotted the countryside, housing wealthy Romano-British families. Mosaics adorned their floors. Heated floors, tiled roofs, imported wine. In towns like Verulamium, Iberacum, and Aquisulis, Roman life thrived. Temples rose to gods foreign and familiar: Mercury, Minerva, Mithras, and eventually, Christ. Yes, even here Christianity crept in. First quietly, then more boldly. Soldiers, merchants, and missionaries brought with them tales of one God, one Savior. By the 4th century, churches emerged, crosses etched into stone. Rome, once a land of many gods, now championed one. But even as belief shifted, something else was unraveling: the empire itself. Rome began to crack under its own weight. Civil wars, corruption, invasions on other fronts. The provinces suffered neglect. Britannia, once prized, became expensive, vulnerable. In 383, a general named Magnus Maximus withdrew troops from the island to fight in Gaul, a dangerous sign. The defensive line thinned. By 407, the remaining legions followed Constantine III, another general claiming the imperial throne. Then, in 410, a letter arrived. It was brief, dismissive. Emperor Honorius told the cities of Britain to look to their own defense. Rome had abandoned the island. Just like that, 4 centuries of empire ended, not with a great battle, not with fire, but with silence. And what was left? Roman towns, slowly fading without garrisons to protect them, roads that led nowhere, a people caught between two identities, no longer fully Roman, not yet something else. Villas collapsed, trade routes dried up, the currency stopped, but not all vanished. In the countryside, Roman culture lingered, among elites, in customs, in language. Christianity endured, hidden but alive. And in the power vacuum, local rulers emerged, some Romanized, others tribal. Kingdoms rose in fragments, war bands clashed. Britain entered a twilight age, not yet medieval, no longer ancient, a shadowland of memory and myth. From the ashes of empire, something new would rise, but it would not come easily. The Romans had gone, the legions had sailed, but the stories they left behind would echo for centuries. And the people? They watched the shores again, for new invaders, new settlers, new names to learn. And once again, they would have to fight for the land beneath their feet. The Anglo-Saxons and the Viking Age, 410 to 1066. The Romans left, but they didn't take the darkness with them. In their absence, the land fractured, walls crumbled, roads became overgrown, Roman villas turned cold, trade slowed to a whisper, and across Britain, warlords rose from the shadows. Some had Roman names, others older, tribal ones. They fought for control of what was left. Stone towns, fertile valleys, sacred groves. Alliances were brief, battles were constant. And the people, farmers, herders, craftsmen, looked for order in a world rapidly breaking apart. But order did not return. Instead, new sails appeared on the horizon, carved wooden ships, sleek, fast. They didn't come from Rome. They came from across the North Sea, the Angles, the Saxons, the Jutes, Germanic tribes, once feared by the Romans themselves, now landed on British shores, not as invaders at first, but as hired swords. British kings invited them to fight off enemies, to protect fragile kingdoms. But they didn't leave. They stayed. They brought families. They took land, village by village, valley by valley. The Britons resisted, but they were pushed west, into Wales, into Cornwall, into memory. And so, a new Britain was born. Latin faded, Celtic tongues retreated. In their place, Old English, a language rough and full of strength, the language of the fields, of fire, of war. By the 7th century, 7 major kingdoms, known as the Heptarchy, had emerged. Northumbria, Mercia, East Anglia, Essex, Kent, Sussex, and Wessex, each ruled by kings, each fighting for dominance. But amid the bloodshed came light. Christianity returned, not from Rome, but from Ireland and Iona, and again through Roman missionaries like Augustine of Canterbury. Monasteries were built, monks copied books by hand, literacy returned, even if only for the few. And culture bloomed. In Northumbria, art and scholarship flourished. The Lindisfarne Gospels, pages alive with color and meaning. At Jarrow, Bede wrote the story of the English people, a historian in a time of turbulence. But peace, again, was short-lived. In 793, a storm arrived, not of wind, but of steel. Vikings. The monastery at Lindisfarne burned, monks were slaughtered, gold stolen, manuscripts drowned in blood. The shockwave rippled through Europe. The Norse were no longer traders. They were predators. Over the next decades, Viking raids became a pattern. Coastal villages were pillaged, churches torched, sacred relics looted. They came for silver, for slaves, for glory, and then they stopped raiding and began conquering. In 865, the great heathen army landed. Unlike the raiders before them, these Vikings came to stay, thousands strong, led by legendary warriors Ivar the Boneless, Halfdan Ragnarsson, Ubba, names that echoed like curses through Anglo-Saxon halls. They carved a path through the kingdoms. East Anglia fell, Northumbria fell, Mercia bent the knee. But in the south, one kingdom held, Wessex, and its king, Alfred the Great. He was no warlord driven by rage. He was a thinker, a planner, a Christian ruler. He understood that to beat the Vikings, he needed more than swords. He needed unity. Alfred reorganized the army, built fortified towns, burhs to defend the people, created a navy to challenge the Vikings at sea. He promoted learning, translated texts, revived law and order. He built not just walls, but a nation. After years of war, he forced the Vikings to a truce. The Danelaw was born, a line dividing Anglo-Saxon Wessex from Viking-held territory in the east and north. 2 cultures, 2 laws, 2 visions of Britain, but Alfred's dream survived him. His successors pushed the line back. Edward the Elder, Athelstan. By the mid-10th century, a unified English crown had emerged. Still, peace was a fragile thing. New waves of Norse warriors arrived. The Kingdom of England was seized by Danish kings, most notably Canute the Great, who ruled not just England, but a North Sea empire stretching to Denmark and Norway. Under Canute, the kingdom was stable, prosperous. But his death shattered it again, and as the crown passed back to the Saxons, enemies circled once more. By the 11th century, another storm brewed across the Channel, this time not Norsemen, but Normans. Duke William of Normandy claimed that King Edward the Confessor had promised him the throne of England. But when Edward died in 1066, the crown passed to Harold Godwinson, an English noble. William called it treason. He prepared an invasion, but before he could strike, Harold had to face another Viking, Harold Hardrada of Norway, who landed in the north. At Stamford Bridge, Harold's army won a hard, bloody victory. But the moment the battle ended, word came. William had landed in the south. The exhausted English army marched south again. And there, on the 14th of October, 1066, two armies met at a place called Hastings. The battle was brutal. Shields broke, arrows rained. Hours passed, and neither side yielded. But late in the day, an arrow, some say, pierced Harold's eye. The English line collapsed. William, Duke of Normandy, became William the Conqueror, the last successful invader of England. And with him, a new age began, the Normans and Plantagenets, 1066 to 1485. The field at Hastings had fallen silent. Crows circled above broken shields and blood-soaked grass. The English king lay dead, his body pierced, his line shattered. William of Normandy stood victorious, not just in battle, but in history. He would be known as William the Conqueror. His march to London was swift. Fear spread faster than fire. The surviving Anglo-Saxon nobles bent the knee or were swept aside. On Christmas Day in 1066, inside Westminster Abbey, William was crowned King of England. But this was no mere crowning. It was a takeover. The Normans didn't just rule England. They replaced its upper class, tore down its power structures, and rebuilt them in their image. Lands were seized. Castles rose from stone and earth, towering symbols of control. The English nobility was stripped of power and replaced by French-speaking lords loyal to Normandy. A new elite, a new language, a new law. Across the countryside, a great survey was ordered, an accounting of all England's wealth. It was called the Doomsday Book, a record of who owned what, of who had power. Nothing like it had ever been done before in the kingdom. It showed the reach of Norman administration, the obsession with control. But control didn't mean peace. The years that followed were riddled with rebellion. Uprisings in the north were answered with brutal reprisals. Whole villages burned, fields salted. It was called the Harrying of the North, a campaign of deliberate starvation and terror. Thousands died. Norman rule would not be challenged again, at least not from within.